blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad, because we are back for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. I'm your host, Jason Sircone, and we are live once again on a Wednesday evening. And tonight, we're going to get a little meta on you because we're going to talk about the power of conversation and why that is so important in podcasting. In all of that, improving your interpersonal communication skills, your soft skills, all of these items that you pick up through everyday life, but also can hone and craft through the podcast microphone, make you a better communicator overall. And I firmly believe that having these powerful conversations is really what podcasting is all about. And when I sat down to plan out season 3 of Let's Blow This Up, I knew I wanted to have an episode where I focused on this subject. And as always here on these live streams, I can't do it alone. I need the help of my friends, and I knew exactly who I wanted to bring on stage for this conversation tonight. He is none other than the host of Soft Skills, Strong Results, a show that I helped him produce in the last few months. He's been on the TEDx stage. He's been on stage in the theater. He's been a professor in all around interpersonal communication and soft skills, but now he is on the biggest stage of them all, the Bombtrack Media Let's Blow This Up stage. I'm talking about none other than Mr. Charlie Krebs. Charlie, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Jason. That was quite an introduction.
I do my best, and I knew that I had to set you up big because when we're talking about the power of conversation, talking about the power of interpersonal communications, I knew, like I said, you were the man I wanted to talk to and put center stage for this because I remember back to the very first time that you and I met for coffee to talk about the potential of you doing a podcast. The conversation it was immediate, as if we had known each other for years. Now that's something that I felt I knew that just in talking to you, that was going to translate to the microphone, but I want to use that as the foundation of our conversation tonight.
Well, something that you didn't know is that when we met that very first time, I was assessing you. I was assessing your soft skills and your ability to communicate. And that within 5 minutes of having a conversation, we were talking about conversations, and I knew right then that this would be fruitful.
And here we are. So that led to the birth of your show. And I know we talked about this off mic. You said that when your show got started and you got comfortable, and I knew it was one of those things that once we got you to that point, I could tell just from the way you communicated, you were going to be a natural. And that's exactly how it unfolded. And the conversations just started to flow. So walk us through how that felt, because you, again, as I said, you've been on the TEDx stage, you've been on stage in theater, you've been a professor, you've had people in front of you in a number of different ways. How did it feel to bring podcasting into the conversation and presentation world for you?
Well, I was nervous, to be honest. And the reason I was nervous is because I had not listened to very many podcasts. I thought that podcasting was probably, the latest fad and that everybody was into it. And then it would just, silently fade away like so many other different things. And then when I started talking to you about the concept and that we were going to get together and meet, I thought, all right, I should pay attention to a few podcasts. And so I watched a few podcasts. And one of the things that I noticed about a number of podcasts was that people seemed to be very on. Hi, everybody. I'm Charlie Krebs, and we're going to talk about. And I thought, that's not me. I can't do that. Maybe this won't work. And then when you and I started to talk, and you made me realize that wasn't a requirement. I didn't need to be like that. So, yes, some people like that. And I mean, that's probably better than being very sedate and very boring and everything. But I think one of the things that I wanted to bring to the podcast and the conversations that I had with you, the word I would use is authentic. Yeah. When I was having conversations with you, I never felt like I was putting on an act. I never felt like you were putting on an act. You didn't suggest that I try to be like that. And I think now that I listen to more podcasts, the ones that I appreciate are the ones that are authentic, where the people are vulnerable. They don't have to have every moment filled with something. They don't have to be perfect. And I think that makes them much more human.
I'm with you there. It's funny. I've gone on record in saying that there is no bigger crop of excited people in the world than podcasters. I can't tell you how many times I've turned on a podcast and they're so excited for this and that. And I've even caught myself saying that. I try not to, just because I know it's just such a overused word. But from what you're saying, I think there's a happy medium to be found.
Right.
You don't want to sound like you really don't want to be there, but you don't want to sound so overly energetic that people just go, my God, they've got to take it down a notch and try some decaf.
Right.
So finding that middle ground, I think, is where the authenticity lives.
Well, and I think part of that comes even from the word conversation. I mean, the CON in conversation, just like the COM in communication, stands for with. And when you're having a good conversation with somebody, you're not thinking about the conversation.
Right.
You're not going, all right, what do I say next? And here's this and here's that. We're not thinking about the conversation. It becomes natural. It's like when you listen to a good speaker, you stop paying attention that they're a speaker and you just go straight into what it is that they're saying.
100%. You know, I've said it many times. I went to this unscripted format here on Let's Blow This Up because that, to me, I felt like my conversational skills had reached a point where I didn't need to script things out. Now, that's not saying I don't prepare. I know who I'm talking to. I know what they're specializing in. I've learned about them through various means, whether it's knowing them from working with them, or I have a brief questionnaire for the new people that I've never officially collaborated with. But for me, I get to know them, but we sit down to talk. It's all just letting it flow. I feel like there's more to be gained there because, like you said, I'm not waiting for you to get done just so I can say the next thing that's in my head. I'm letting things unfold naturally so I can follow up on that. And I learned that from my past podcasts. And this, again, like, this is not something you just wake up one day and do. I'm bringing 10 years of experience and practice and really honing this craft to where now I feel comfortable doing that. But I can tell any podcaster out there, focusing on the conversation is going to produce much better content. And you can set yourself up by slowly and gradually reducing the number of questions you put in front of yourself. Instead saying, listen, I'm going to go into this saying, I'm only going to ask 2 or 3 questions. I really just want to focus on having a good conversation.
Well, and then the conversation becomes impulsive and spontaneous, and you say something and it sparks something in me, and then I say something and it sparks something in you, and the audience follows along with us. Yeah. They don't go, all right, we're on question number 17 now, and it all becomes natural and organic.
Exactly. And having that experience on stage, let's compare this to your TEDx talks. Do you feel there are big parallels between how you're presenting yourself on a microphone via the podcast medium to how you're communicating with that live audience?
Yes, because when I've coached dozens of TEDx speakers and I've given a couple of TEDx talks. And one of the things that I always coach people to do is to make it like a conversation. If you and I were sitting there having coffee, we would just be having a conversation. And when I'm listening to a speech, I don't want a speech to feel like a speech because that turns me off and I disconnect. And the person doesn't seem genuine. They seem like they're putting on an act or putting on a persona. And the best speeches are the ones where I forget that I'm listening to a speech. I mean, I taught public speaking for 22 years and I would grade hundreds of speeches a year. And every once in a while, I'd be grading a speech. And I always had a form that I filled out to grade the student. And sometimes I'd be halfway through the speech and go, I'm forgetting to fill out this form. And that's when I knew it was a good speech because I got lost in it. You know, just like when we have conversations, we get lost in the conversation. Next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by and we go, we better get back to what we wanted to cover in this meeting here.
Yeah. And I think there are certain times where, again, you're not going into it with that mindset that it's going to be in one direction or one certain direction. You're hoping that it does, but overall, conversations can take a number of different directions. But if you have that type of moment where you're lost in it, that's where you know you got something special. And that's what I feel podcasters should aspire to, because it does come off as much more genuine. And from a listener standpoint, I can speak for my own consumption habits. I get consumed much more when the conversation is powerful versus a show that's very rigid, or if it's just a host that's asking this list of questions and not, and like, I've heard this a lot. They ask a question, the person answers, and they say, great. And they move right into the next question. And it's, there's, that feels so canned. And I believe that more and more podcasts are getting away from that these days, because as our medium evolves, more people are wrapping their arms around the fact that a powerful conversation is really what's going to drive their show forward.
Well,
but
and if you think about it,
hanging out that are still hanging on to the old ways, and let's knock those out today.
And if you think about it, podcasting isn't about podcasting.
Nope.
Podcasting is about ideas and lessons and things that we want to learn, and how we can grow and how we can help other people. You know, it's just like acting isn't about acting. When you start to notice the acting, you stop being lost in the moment.
You're right.
When the acting is transparent and you go straight into the story, that's when it becomes the most powerful. I mean, I've seen shows where all of a sudden it's intermission, and I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to pay attention to the acting. And that's when you know that it's good.
Yeah, that suspension of disbelief. I've never really applied that to podcasting, but that's very true. I've had people tell me that sometimes listening to a podcast feels like they're eavesdropping on somebody in a coffee shop. And I remember one of my clients, Mary Kitchen. It's funny, I'll bring her up because her podcast, The Cleanup Crew, Bookkeeping Without the Chaos, just went live today. First season is live, so there's a free plug for Mary. That was one of the first things she said to me when we were talking about podcasting. And I pointed out that's a good thing, because if you feel so compelled to listen to what's happening at the next table, that means they're talking about something interesting.
Right, because when I've been in situations where I actually have been sort of eavesdropping and everything, you don't want them to know you're eavesdropping, but you can't take your ear off what's going on because it's so interesting, and you're not supposed to be there. And I love that metaphor, the idea of feeling like you're eavesdropping on something that you shouldn't be hearing, because then it pulls you in.
And that's the whole point. I think, but I draw a lot of parallels from podcasting. I've said this before, with television, with movies, because in a lot of ways, this is all entertainment. Of course, it's informative. Infotainment is the slang term for that combo. But I feel like there's something to be gained from the conversation that brings a person in and engages them to a point that they don't want to leave the seat. A good movie, a good show, a good documentary is going to do that as well. So if you're creating content on that level, you're setting your audience up for an experience that not only do they want to come back for, but they want to tell others. And that's how you grow the audience. When they start telling others, holy crap, you've got to listen to Charlie's podcast. There's something special happening there.
You just mentioned information. There are two basic ways of giving speeches, if you will. There are informative speeches and persuasive speeches. And I always suggest that people steer away from informative speeches, because that's about the information. But with persuasive speeches, and that's what I feel we're doing here, that's what I've heard with other podcasts that you've done, and that's what I tried to do on mine, is persuade people to learn something. Persuade people to change their mind, change their ideas, change their values, even change their actions. And if you're just reciting information, one thing after another, you're not really engaging them. Whereas I think engaging conversation is conversation that I want to pay attention to. Yeah. The speaker or the podcasters shouldn't have to force an audience to pay attention. If it's a good podcast and I'm the listener, I'm giving you my attention. And that's a sign of success, I think.
I agree with you completely. And it's important to realize, too, that this is the type of thing that develops over time. The more you get comfortable on the microphone, on the camera, having conversations, making those connections with your collaborators, it becomes more of a natural thing. The biggest thing that holds a lot of people back is the fact that they aren't committed for that long-term gain. They want results immediately. They want to grow and be the biggest show in the universe. And it just doesn't work that way. But one of the biggest things I try to drive into everyone's minds when I talk to them is that when you are developing your show and you're learning how to get good at this, The audience is small, so you can fall down a few more times with less eyes on you, but you're developing a skill set that's going to continue to grow. And by the time you're really, really good, that's when you're going to be ready to have more people show up and consume what you have for them.
Right. You talked earlier about finding a halfway medium point. And I think in terms of just having conversations and going for it, we've all had this happen where you're in a conversation and you go out on a limb and you start talking about something, and a minute or two later you say to the person you're talking to, why did I bring that up? And you forgot why you did that. So I think that's one of the, I mean, that happened to me when I was doing my podcast. There were a couple moments when I thought, and that was a learning moment, because I thought, all right, this is when I need to make sure I've got something to look at that I can fall back on, and there's my notes, and then I can pick it up so it doesn't appear like I've fallen off. So it's about when you go out on those limbs or go off on those tangents, leave some breadcrumbs so you can find your way back.
And what I love about the podcast environment, this what we're doing right now is a little different. I'm going to explain the difference, and I think everybody's going to know where I'm going with this. You can go off on as many tangents as you want and try as many limbs as you desire when you're creating your show. Whatever you don't want can be edited out in post-production. So your final product that the audience experiences is exactly what you want it to be. And you may stumble across something as you're producing your show that you hadn't thought about while it was coming together. Now you've just got more gold to interweave with your planned content. In the live environment like we're in now, it's a little bit different, but at the same time, I put out an audio replay of this on Fridays, and I can make that sound exactly like I want. So if there is anything that we might have messed up or something that you might have said that you said, Jason, take that out, I could take that out. So there's lots of ways to do it, but I think the creativity comes from just being yourself. And that's a compliment I'll pay to you, Charlie, because I know when we went to the studio, Content House out in Beaver Falls, and once we got that studio set up and you sat down, we did your solo episodes first, and you just went. And I sat back and said, holy shit, this guy came into this like a duck in water. It was just this natural ability to communicate your points, and you didn't stumble that much, which was great.
But when you do stumble, it's like, I mean, I've done a lot of acting, and at some point when you're acting, you forget your lines, and you can't just stop the show, and you don't want the audience to know that something's gone wrong, and you find a way of weaving things together, or a picture falls off the wall, and you've somehow got to incorporate that into the story or something. And so when you make little bobbles, that's not the end of the world. I mean, it makes it a little imperfect. And I think for the same reason, that's why people like vinyl, because it's not as perfectly clean as a CD. And it's those little imperfections that make you vulnerable. And I think those vulnerabilities make us human. And when you're human, people can relate to you. I remember, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I did a lot of auditioning when I was doing a lot of acting. And when I would audition, I would always accidentally forget a line or make a mistake or something like that. And then I would make it look like I was thinking, and then I would brilliantly work my way out of that hole. And afterwards, sometimes people would come up to me and say, that moment when you forgot where you were going, that might as well have been scripted. That was perfect. And obviously I didn't tell them that I did that on purpose, but it was the humanity that people like.
You bring up a very interesting point, and you had mentioned this before too. I feel in today's world, there are too many things that are overly produced, and there removal of every single imperfection to the point where I think we as humans appreciate something that's a little bit raw.
Right.
So I'm big, and when I create a podcast, I want to create the best listener experience possible for the video, the best viewing experience possible. So removing words that don't belong, if it doesn't interfere with the conversation, like that's hanging there, I can get those out and no one's the wiser. But overall, you don't have to have a perfect final product, and people are going to forgive you.
Absolutely.
And now that's something I think it holds people back, because there is this mindset that it has to be perfect. And it's mostly because we live in this highlight reel driven world to where we see all of these final products that people are putting out and they're nice and polished and shiny, but we're not seeing behind the curtain where it's super messy and there's blood, sweat, and tears all over the floor.
Right.
Everybody goes through those growing pains at some point in their journey. So you can't let the thought of, well, I'm not where they are on year 10 and I'm here on day 1 planning this out, stop you from pressing the start button, because you're going to cost yourself something special.
Right. I remember having spent much of my life in the theater. We did a lot of invited dress rehearsals where we might have everybody in the cast invite a couple of friends to our final dress rehearsal, and things could go wrong. And the audiences liked it when things would go wrong because they saw behind the curtain, if you will.
Yeah. Well, think of all of the television shows that have blooper reels on their DVDs, and at the end of the seasons, wherever the bloopers can be found, we love the blooper reels. In a lot of cases, the bloopers are better than the actual show.
Well, think about the actors that we know that they would improvise a scene and then they would use the improvised scene in the film.
Yep. There are so many moments in television and movies where you see these outtakes and it's people that they're playing a serious role, but they break character or they miss a line and they go completely out of character. And it's so funny because you're still looking at them as this character, but now they're almost playing another character, but it's really just themselves. And the point being is that you can get sucked into that so much that I look at this is another parallel that I've drawn with podcasting, that I know I'm not splitting any atoms when I say this, but I feel that people get invested in the host, and that's why the show grows. And that's why one of the big hangups that I think we have to overcome in podcasting is thinking that having a celebrity or a VIP on our show is what's going to make our show take off and put us on the map. That may get you a little pop, but more than likely, anybody that showed up for that celebrity or VIP is following that celebrity or VIP.
Right.
Your loyal listeners, your audience that become your advocates, they are falling in love with you. And the more you present great content to them and the more consistently you show up for them, proving that you are there to serve their needs, that's going to make their affection for you grow even more. And that's going to get them completely invested in what you're doing.
The more you let your own individuality show, the more they're going to connect with you. I mean, there's only one of you in the world. Why should you try to be somebody else? Because I think if people can start to sense who you are and get a feeling of who you are and like who you are, you become that person that they want to follow. And you don't have to be a celebrity to do that.
Not at all. And I think maybe this is just how I see it. I don't know. I haven't really researched this. I think the definition of celebrity is changing in our world. Thanks to the influencer economy from the social media accounts, we're following people and we're seeing them almost daily, most of them daily. And they're not on the level of like a Leonardo DiCaprio or a George Clooney. I mean, like these big actors that we would define as a celebrity in the past, it's not the same anymore. But because they're so frequently in our face, it feels like they are a celebrity. So I think the definition is taking on a whole new layer.
Look at the guy is he the equipment manager for Duke that you see him in the Final Four?
Yes.
He's this little guy and he's the celebrity.
Yep. Yeah. And you think of some of these people too, like these people that have built massive accounts, like this is probably a dumb reason for being a celebrity, but I know there's this guy that does like these wrestling things where he jumps onto barbed wire and broken glass. It's stupid, but he's got massive following because those people see him as important and they want to see him beat up his body every day. I don't agree with it, but they it's like just the other extreme.
They like watching a personality.
Yes.
No, it's not just a talking head. They like seeing that there's a real person in there.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's one of the things I think about with podcasting. We had talked about this before we went live. When you add that layer to it, you add authenticity to it, really what you're driving at is a vehicle that helps people build trust in you. Mm-hmm. When people build trust in you in one way, shape, or form, that's going to tell the story. And when depending on what your goals are with your podcast, a lot of people I talk to are looking to generate leads or showcase their expertise and position themselves in authority in their niche. That can be done through the podcast medium if you're willing to be authentic, if you're willing to take the time to learn the craft, and if you're willing to develop those communication, whether, interpersonal communication, soft skills, all the things I know you're very passionate about. If you take the time to develop those skills, they're going to play such a role in putting you in that spot where in many ways you may become a celebrity for your audience, which may not be the world's biggest, but your people are coming to you and they see you as the expert. That could lead to everything you've ever wanted to achieve.
Well, and when you let yourself show, it's what I call psychological nakedness. I mean,
yeah,
you let yourself be there. I mean, you don't have to be perfect. I mean, the whole idea of being naked, nobody's going to be surprised at anything they see, because I mean, we come in two flavors, but if you can just go, this is me, this is who I am, so take it or leave it, then you're being authentic and you're being vulnerable. And I think vulnerability gets a bad rap. Yeah. I think people are afraid to be vulnerable. Oh my gosh, if I'm imperfect, people won't want to do business with me. Well, there's a good reason why we're vulnerable. I mean, we live on a planet that's rotating a star that's hurtling through a universe of inexplicability. We ought to be vulnerable. So if we embrace that and see vulnerability as a strength rather than seeing it as a weakness, I mean, I can connect with somebody that's not perfect. I can't connect with Superman or Superwoman. I can connect with somebody, that says once in a while.
I think it's become more normalized in our world to have a little bit more vulnerability. I know some people take it to the extreme with what they do socially through Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. But overall, I think there is not so much of a need for this facade where you put up this wall of you're inconquerable because you have to have the show of strength that makes people believe that nothing is ever wrong with you. But we know that's not human. And we know that no matter what, behind the scenes, there could be something going on. And for some people, it's a lot worse than others. But overall, I think that general what we put in front of people type of content, it will tell a story, but in a lot of ways, it's become much more acceptable to say, I fucked this up, or I hurt, or I'm in whatever the case may be, because we know that we're going to have people to back us up because they can relate. They know what that's like.
Absolutely. I mean, when you listen to somebody and everything's perfect, it gets boring. It's like when you watch a comedy show. Well, I mean, think about shows like MASH or Cheers or Friends or The Big Bang Theory, whatever you want to talk about. They had serious moments. Mm-hmm. I remember when Howard's mother died, or when Henry Blake's plane went down in MASH. Those moments just took us away from that hype, and they brought us right back down to earth.
And that's where you want to talk about what gets you invested. There's that emotional investment in how you fall in love with those characters. I think one that really stands out to me that always hits me anytime I see it was when Leo McGarry died on The West Wing. Did you ever watch The West Wing?
Yes.
Because that character was so big and he did so much, but he had that vulnerable side, recovering alcoholic and drug addict, but still achieved much. But when he died, damn, that hurt. And I really appreciated how they were able to interweave the story with him dying in real life, John Spencer, the actor. And that to me was that one always stands out because, again, being one of my favorite shows, that, I think back and like, damn, that one hurt. That one took a minute. Like everybody was feeling that. And you could tell Cass was feeling that. I think when they caught a lot of real emotion in the show. That's special, even if it's coming from a bad occurrence.
Well, when you listen to somebody give a speech, like for example, a eulogy or something like that, and they genuinely get caught in the moment, that takes your breath away because it's not contrived. It's not manufactured. It's genuine emotion,
From the heart.
and everybody has genuine emotions, and we try to cover them up sometimes. And I'm not saying that everybody should be blubbering all the time, but when somebody's speaking or they see something or they recall something that takes their breath away, it pulls me in. Because it's their humanity is speaking to my humanity. And I think in podcasting, when you hear somebody be human, that connects with my humanity.
No, I agree with that 100%. And a moment ago, you mentioned the boredom and just how boring that perfection can be. I think back to a podcast I did several years ago, and my friend Travis Brown made a great analogy talking about this perfection that so many people want to try to attain. But when you do, it's like, why? Because his analogy was this white room. And I know I've been in homes that have this room. Everything's white. The carpet, the furniture, the walls, the fixtures, everything is white. And it's designed to be this picture of perfection. It's one of those rooms where they say, oh, that's just the room we look at. We don't go in there because we don't want to mess it up. But it's so freaking boring because there's no color. It's all just white. Why would you want that in your house? Why would you want a room that you couldn't live in because it was too perfect?
That's the point. If it's too perfect, you can't live in it.
Exactly.
When people are animated and they're speaking, they think that it's not monotone. They think that monotone is just when you talk like this and blah, blah, blah. But if you're talking like this all the time and you don't come down, that's monotone as well. And that gets boring. So the idea is to be unpredictable, because when you hear somebody do something unpredictable, it catches you off guard and you pay attention. When I first moved to Illinois and I drove to Chicago, like for 2.5 hours, you're just driving straight up I-57. And all of a sudden there were speed bumps in the middle of the highway. And I thought, what's there a speed bump doing here? And the whole idea is that you're just going straight. You got to do something to shake that up a little bit.
In the middle of the highway, though?
Yeah.
I mean,
there were these speed bumps right in the middle of the highway, just because if you started to fall asleep, it would keep you from falling asleep.
Okay, I was thinking like to the point where you had to slow down to go.
Oh, no.
Okay, because that would be, there's boredom and then there's stupidity, and we're really going to have to label each of those differently. Okay, that's good to know. So, Charlie, tell us, me and the Bomb Squad, more about the soft skills that you've discovered through podcasting. And maybe even better way to say this is, how did you apply some of the soft skills that you've developed over the years to your podcasting practices and even your public speaking practices over the years?
Well, I think let's start and define the difference between soft skills and interpersonal communication skills.
Good call.
Soft skills are a wide range of maybe personal attributes or social skills or emotional intelligence traits that they help us interact with other people. And they even help us succeed in our own personal lives. For example, in soft skills, there are interpersonal soft skills that have to do with interacting with other people, things like listening and empathy and rapport. And then there are cognitive soft skills, which have to do with thinking and goal setting and problem solving and things along those lines. So we have soft skills, but then interpersonal communication is a subset of soft skills. And interpersonal communication is more about how people exchange information. Not all of it is done with words. I mean, words really only account for about 10% of communication. The other maybe 30% has to do with tone of voice, and the other 50 or 60% have to do with nonverbals. So interpersonal communication is interacting with other people. Soft skills are all of those attributes that help us figure out who we are and interact with life. And so when you and I started talking, I was going through a period where I wasn't really sure as a business person. I mean, I moved here almost 3 years ago, and I wanted to speak on what I called mental engineering and how we think. And that wasn't necessarily going well. And then I spent some time doing speech coaching, and that was a lot of fun. And I still do that, but I still hadn't quite found my niche. And so when I started working with you and you asked me all of these questions, I started to realize that one of the things that I've focused on throughout my career had to do with valuing people. And so the idea of soft skills really came to the forefront through a lot of the questions that you were asking me about what I was trying to teach. And the thinking is one of our great soft skills. And so my idea of mental engineering fit in there. And so I think that one of the biggest, as a professional speaker, they always say, figure out what the pain point is. What's the pain that you're trying to solve for some business? And I think one of the biggest pains, we've talked about this when we've met, is the fact that people don't communicate well.
Yeah.
Number one, they don't listen well. Most people think they listen great and they're all wrong. People listen so they can respond. They don't listen to try to understand other people. And plus, people don't make eye contact. I did some studies with people that would come to my office. And when I'm asking someone, mostly students, but when I would ask a student a question, they look at me. When they're thinking of what to answer, they're looking up in the air and they're looking around the room. And then when they're trying to answer the question, they're looking around the room. And then when they're done, then they finally look back at me. And I think that lack of eye contact sends a message. If I'm not bothering to look at you, it kind of sends the message that I don't value you. And the way we feel about people leaks out. People can tell if you don't like them or not. Okay. Our messages do that. We send a message that has content, whatever the content is, please pass the ketchup. But then there's also affinity. Do we like someone or not? There's respect, which is self-evident. And then there's control. Am I trying to control you? Or do I feel like you're controlling me? And so those three aspects of how we interact relationally with other people send messages. If I don't like you, I don't have to say I don't like you. You can tell.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell in my tone of voice. Maybe you can tell it the way that I turn my body, or that I never come all the way into your office. I just stand in the doorway or things like that. So I think I realized that soft skills was where my expertise really lie, which I can never get those right, where my expertise was. And so that's working with you. That sort of helped me figure that was my niche.
It's amazing that, as you say that, I was thinking back on and not to say I wasn't listening, completely defeat the purpose here. But I was, in my mind, I was thinking, like, there were a couple times where I know that I've collaborated with people, and when there isn't chemistry. You could tell almost immediately. I've had it when I've gone on their show, and I've had it once or twice on my show. Not this show. Fortunately, Let's Blow This Up has been clean across the board. I'm happy to say that. Everybody I've collaborated with, I've been able to have great conversations with. But I've had some guests in the past on previous shows where it was a struggle to get through that conversation and really get out of it what I wanted. They were conversational for the most part, but you could tell that they didn't care about the connection that was happening with me and trying to have that genuine conversation. It's almost like they were just working the circuit.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
How could you tell? What was it they did?
Well, and it's funny you say that, because in this mode that we're in now, having this digital connection with the screen, it was body language. It was eye movement. It was facial expressions. It wasn't so much in the tone of their voice. In some cases it was, maybe they didn't like the question that I asked, or maybe they felt like they were asked that question way too many times and it was just this run-of-the-mill thing. I don't know. But I do know that I could see just by looking at them that they weren't totally into it. And maybe that was, I mean, like, I always try to internalize things like that. Did I do something on my end to not fully communicate what I wanted from this show? Did I not clearly express my expectations for their guest appearance? And I will say, and this is, again, one of those things that has only happened a couple times, but to me, it's a real indicator that that person did not want to be a part of the show. Typically, when a podcast ends and the recording stops, there's usually a little bit of green room time, quote unquote, to where you sit and talk and break. That was a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. And you talk about maybe a certain point that came up during the conversation. I've had times where I've hit record and they've already left.
Wow.
And that to me tells me, okay, like they're never going to share this. They're never going to interact with this. I'll be lucky if I ever talk to that person again. And again, we don't all have to love each other, but to me, I'm thinking on what you're saying, and I'm wondering, as podcasters, what can we do to bridge that gap? To me, I think the answer lies in communication and how we're communicating with that person on the front end before we ever connect to record, them understanding exactly what they're going to experience and what we want to achieve by having them on our show. And then communication during, obviously, having a good conversation, making sure there's mutual back and forth, there's some synergy. But where it gets lost many times in the podcast world is that communication after the recording ends. When that person, you go your separate ways. I always ask podcasters, what are you doing to keep that conversation going? Because if you let it die and then you put that episode out in a few months and there's been zero communication in between there, their excitement is pretty much dead. And the likelihood of them getting behind that content and sharing it is not as high as if you were to just take some. I'm not saying you drop everything to just be their friend and follow them everywhere every day, right. But seeing what they put online, dropping little comments here and there when you come across their stuff when you're scrolling through your feed. There are little things that you can do to keep things rolling. To me, that's where the communication part of podcasting does get lost. But if that's put into play, it makes for a much better experience for everybody involved.
Well, I think one of the things that when you were just saying all that came to mind is the word want. I mean, as I'm sort of sitting on my shoulder and watching this play out in front of us, I feel like I want to know what you have to say. And I feel like you want to know what I have to say. When you and I would be in those conversations at that, is it Mediterra coffee shop? I felt like you wanted to know what I thought. And I wanted to know what you thought. I didn't know what I was doing. So I was trying to hang on every word of what you have to say. And so in the middle, when I was doing my podcast, that's why I love your idea about not having it over-scripted.
Yeah.
I would listen to what people say. And I thought, wait a minute, explain that a little more. What do you mean by that? Or how did you know that? And I think the idea of wanting to know more shows up. You're right in their nonverbals. Are they engaged? Are they looking at you? And I think that's very hard online. In fact, I'm trying to do it as we speak, is making sure to look at the camera.
Look at the camera, yeah.
Because if I look at you, which I'm doing right now, I'm looking at you, Jason, but it looks like I'm not looking at you. So in order to make it look like you, I've got to be looking at the camera, and that really takes some practice.
Oh, I could not agree more. And that was one of those things. I've gotten good at it, but that took time. That took a lot of practice and just I go back on some of my old shows and I know I was not doing that. And that was just in seeing it. I said, I need to do a better job of just talking to the little circle on my computer. And that's not the easiest thing to do, but it's another one of those skills. And that's when I talk about podcasting in today's world, I always say get comfortable on the camera and get comfortable on the microphone. It's right. Mutual at this point because
it's like getting comfortable on the stage. You get up on the stage and everybody's looking at you. And I would even say to my students that were standing up in front of the class, I said, you don't want them looking out the window. You want them looking at you. And when you're doing a podcast, you want them paying attention to you. Yeah. And so embrace that. And what can you do to engage them so they're giving you their attention? You don't have to work for it.
100%. I've seen this in the live environment in my networking group when everybody gets their chance to give the longer presentation. Every few months you get put into that circle. And when somebody just does that typical, here's my slideshow of my life story, there's people on their cell phones, there's people on their computers, they're not engaged. But when somebody gets up there and truly does something that's meant to engage, it's more thought out. It's not look at my PowerPoint. It's this is what I want to talk about today. You can look around the room and you can see there are more eyes focused on that person because they are genuinely captivated by what they have to say.
When you try to engage somebody, it sends the message that you value them. Mm-hmm. If I value you, I'm going to look at you. If I value you, I'm going to speak in a way that's more interesting. If I value you, I'm not going to make you look at 40 or 50 PowerPoint slides. Right. If I value you, I'm going to say, what can I do to help him?
And what I'll add to that, Charlie, because I think this translates to podcasting in so many ways, I'm talking to one person, especially when I do my solo podcast. But even when I'm doing conversations like this, I feel that you and I are in the moment having our conversation, but we're talking to one person at a time. Right. And I try to build this content out and present it in that fashion. And I see so many influencers online and podcasters as well say, hey, guys is the one that I hear more than anything. But I feel like that removes some of that personal one-on-one attention, because when I'm in a solo environment, and I love doing my solo series on this show, I'm talking to the camera. To me, it's one-to-one. This is as if it was me and you at the coffee shop again. If I were to say, hey, guys, over and over and over and over, that would be a little weird. And I feel like you're talking to just you. It would be like I'm talking to this mass audience. The only thing I've defined my audience as the Bomb Squad. If you're in the audience, you are a member of the Bomb Squad. And typically I'll kick out the show by saying, look alive, Bomb Squad. That's my address to everyone. After that, it is all about focusing on one person, because in most podcast environments, it's being consumed one person at a time.
Well, and even when you're talking, like right now, I'm talking to you, but if you were doing this as a solo, mm-hmm. you mentioned influencers. I think influencers are a lot of people that are influencers, and just a lot of people that are speakers. It's about them. Look at me. Look at how important I am. Think about me. Think about me. Think about me. And they're posing. Yeah. Whereas good speakers, good actors, good podcasters, it's not about you, it's about the audience. Yeah. What do you want the audience to think? What's your purpose? And I think that's why before with the emails that we handed back and forth before we got on today, we were talking about, all right, what do you want your audience to walk away with? What's the purpose of all of this? So it's not just you and me, blah, 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 blah. What do you want people to walk away with? And I think that's the difference between good podcasts and bad ones.
Absolutely, because I think the biggest thing to remember as a consumer of any content, basically anything, you're going to say, what's in it for me? And this is no different. Someone, if they choose to watch live or they choose to consume the audio version of the show, they're looking at it saying, what's in this for me? What am I going to learn? And it's up to me to express that through a show title, through show notes, through a description to lead into the live stream. And if we get people to tune in, great. That to me is exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. But where it can sometimes fall off the rails is if I don't set the table the right way, there's nothing to intrigue a person to want to take that step. So we look at podcasting as a whole. Obviously, there's many moving parts. But to me, the biggest one is this part right here, because you could do everything right, but once they click play and you don't deliver, they're gone. And
right, because
hear the whole message.
In reality, people that watch a podcast or listen to a podcast, like for example, right now, anybody that's watching this, they don't care about you and me, Jason. Yeah. They care about what we say and how it affects their life.
They care about themselves.
So it's so important to make sure that the audience is the focus.
100%. I think there's something to gain from the fact that on the initial brush, the first time that someone finds you, more than likely they're in search of a solution. Maybe you're giving a speech and it's themed around whatever they're looking for. They choose to come watch that live, or they want to listen to a podcast or watch a video or read a blog. There's something in their life they want an answer to. You've positioned your content to answer that question or provide that solution.
Absolutely.
Once you get the person in the door, it's up to you to deliver on what they asked for, which is why I believe full-heartedly that you dive right into the content and the meaning of the show right from the start. And little pieces of your story will be interwoven throughout that conversation because it's natural. That's what we do in conversation. But once people tune into your content and you've helped them solve that problem, now you've got trust. Now they know that when they listen to you, you're going to help them answer those questions, find those solutions.
Absolutely.
And that will continue to build, because if they've got more questions, or maybe they just love the cut of your jib and they're going to start looking at everything else that you're doing, that's how you can build an audience. But that takes time. Did you just Zach Morris time out me?
No, yeah, the cut of their jib.
Oh, I went old school on that one. Well, you went old school. Cut of the jib, like it's an old Navy slang for the coat, I think, right? I think that's where that comes from. It means you like their style.
Oh, that's a new one.
I stumped you. I stumped you to the point that you gave me a Zach Morris timeout from Saved by the Bell. So listeners of tonight's live stream and the replay are not going to get to experience it. I just got Zach Morris here. That's a first on this show. So we're both going old school. That's okay.
That's great.
But no, I think that's a big part of it. Is the more great content you put in front of people, the higher the likelihood is that you're putting something in front of them that's going to develop that trust. And I'll go right back to the whole thing that we've been really had this whole conversation built around tonight. The communication part is huge, and the conversation is what really drives a good podcast home, because there's so much that can be pulled from that. And conversations are what drive life. Storytelling. This has been as old as time. When you can genuinely relate a solution to somebody through storytelling and have it relate to something that they may have experienced too, that's a grand slam every single time.
I agree. I mean, before the printing press, that's how information was always passed on, was people sitting around the campfire sharing legends. So storytelling is in our DNA.
Mm-hmm. And think about this, anybody listening, watching, Charlie, same to you. You think about consuming content. What sucks you in? Blah, 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 blah. The teacher from Peanuts, there's really no direction, or a good story.
All right.
And a good story can come in many forms. But I've always felt that it's at the root of podcasting, because you have such an opportunity to elaborate. Mm-hmm. There's no time constraints here. We bought this airtime, baby. We could go as long as we want to tonight if we wanted to. We could keep this going until the wee hours. But we're not gonna. But
well, you talk about conversation, and I think one of the biggest things about conversation is the idea of conversing with someone. Tonight, I feel like it was between us. You'd say something, I'd say something, you'd ask a question, I'd ask a question, and it was all about where were we going with this conversation, not you talk, I talk, you talk, I talk. It was with each other.
Right, and that's, I know when we talked earlier today, you asked me what questions I was going to ask. And I said, I don't know. We'll figure that out as we go.
And look at where we've gone.
Right. Like I said, I never have had any trouble filling an hour doing it this way. And I look at it as a challenge every week, because there are times fortunately, I've never had it here. And I attribute a lot of that to, I'm bringing on people that I know are going to deliver a great experience for viewers and listeners, and for myself. I know I get to have a great conversation with a like-minded professional that's going to provide great insight, and things are going to flow naturally. But we've all been in that scenario at some point in our lives where we've been stuck in a conversation with someone, and maybe you're given the signal, like, come save me. I got nothing to say to this person. They've got nothing to say to me. And that hurts. But to tie that to a podcasting preparation thing, know your guest. Prepare for your conversation. That's why I have a two-pronged approach to this, depending on who I'm talking to. Charlie, you and I know each other very well. So I knew exactly how I would, or I knew exactly what we were going to get into tonight. And I knew I didn't have to ask you some questions to get to know you because I've already done that. But there are some other folks that I've never worked with, I've never collaborated with before. So I give them a questionnaire to fill out. It's some basic questions, but it allows me to get to know them. And if they answer something that's so interesting that I might just bring it up naturally, that's great. A lot of times I don't do that at all. It's just my means of getting to know them. But sometimes their answer will be so different or so perfect, we have to talk about it on the show.
Right.
Either way, I'm getting to know them. That's my preparation, and that's something that I'll wrap. I'm gonna drop the mic on this one because I think I haven't heard this in a while. Maybe it's dead now. If you're a host and you're bringing somebody on your show and they show up, you are not allowed to say, "What do you want to talk about today?" That is on you as the host to know what you want to talk about because you are steering that ship. So don't go to that level. So
you can start asking them a couple questions, and then based on what they say, if you're actively listening, you're going, "Oh, they just said that. Let's play off of that," or "Let me ask a follow-up question with that," or "How does that connect with that?"
Yep. And there's another way to get the conversation going. Don't ask the dreaded question of "Tell me about yourself."
Right.
Because that could go in a number of different directions. And before you know it, you may be 20 minutes deep and you haven't even really got to what you wanted to talk about.
Well, and your audience doesn't care.
You may have lost listeners by that point. You're a little checked out because it's like, Jesus, I can't get this person to stop and get them reined in. Ask a question that gets them talking and telling a story right out of the gates. I've always found that as a great way to get things rolling is instead of you just come into the show and ask them a very poignant question and instantly puts them in storytelling mode. They're already starting to loosen up and feel a little bit more natural in their environment. And that could stimulate the rest of your conversation going forward.
And then it's a natural conversation. It's not canned.
Exactly. That's the thing. We want to grow. I know podcasters across the board, whether you're doing this for fun or whether you're doing it for your business and you're trying to attract more of the right people to your show, you're trying to find the best methods of doing that, and good conversations are going to drive that. They're going to put your show in a much better place. The more you continue to deliver to your audience those great stories and those great conversations, the more they're going to tune in every week and tell others to do the same. But it's all about learning that skill first.
And conversations are softer. They're not hard selling.
Right. 100%. That's a phenomenal way to wind this down. So, Charlie, I want to give you the opportunity. First of all, thank you for taking the time to join me tonight.
I've enjoyed it. It's gone fast.
It does. Every time, like I said, we'd have no problem filling an hour. I know just based on our past conversation. I mean, we've sat for 4 or 5 hours doing a VIP day together. I knew we'd make this happen.
Oh, yeah.
But I want you to give the Bomb Squad a free plug of your podcast. Tell them what they're going to learn and how they can find it.
Thank you. The podcast is called Soft Skills, Strong Results, and it's practical strategies to manage interpersonal communication. And we've already recorded 5 episodes, thanks to Jason, and I'm posting them on LinkedIn, and it's been a great journey. So, Jason, thank you for helping me do that. And if you want more information, you can go to charliekrebs.com.
Charlie, it's been a pleasure helping you get that first season off the ground. I know we're in the early stages of talking about season 2 of Soft Skills, Strong Results. So we're going to keep building on that foundation that you laid. But Bomb Squad, I will say, take a listen to Charlie's podcast because what he's got are 5 solid episodes, all packed with information that is very applicable to you no matter what you're doing. If you're whether you're just in the early stages of starting a podcast or you're looking to take your existing podcast to the next level, or maybe you're not even in podcasting and have that thought yet, but you are looking to communicate better with your colleagues, with clients, with loved ones, Charlie's podcast is going to help you make that happen. So I'll make it easy. I'm going to put both those links, a link to his podcast and a link to charliekrebs.com in the show notes so you can easily access what Charlie has to offer. My friend, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. I'll stick around.
This has been a lot of fun. And Bomb Squad, as always, if you watch live, thank you so much for being here. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Next week, I'll be back with Eric Johnson, who is the founder of Lightning Pod. Eric and I are going to tackle a very fun subject, one that's very near and dear to me, and I learned very near and dear to Eric as well. It's easy to start a podcast, but it's hard to make a podcast. We're going to dissect that thought and dive into the nitty-gritty of what it truly takes to build a podcast and make it a long-term entity in everything that you do. Until next week, jump back in the archives. Make sure you're checking out all of the episodes here in season 3 of Let's Blow This Up. We're about halfway through this season, and I'm having the time of my life. I hope you are too. So until our paths cross again, this has been Let's Blow This Up. For Charlie Krebs, I am Jason Sircone. We will see you next week. Till then, stay explosive.